A woman goes into labor and gives birth to 10 babies. But when doctors discover that one of them is not a human child, everyone is horrified by what was inside the woman's belly. Emily sat in the car, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The sky was clear, and the sunlight filtered through the hospital parking lot, casting a soft glow over everything. Today was the day she and her husband, Michael, would finally see their baby for the first time. They had waited months for this ultrasound, imagining what their little one might look like. Michael, ever the optimist, squeezed her hand reassuringly as they walked toward the entrance. "It's going to be fine," he whispered, his voice calm yet filled with anticipation. But as Emily glanced down at her belly, far larger than it should have been for her stage in pregnancy, an unsettling wave of concern washed over her. The baby had been growing so rapidly, it almost didn't seem real. She exchanged a worried look with Michael, who smiled, trying to keep her calm. Yet, in his eyes, she saw the same flicker of uncertainty that had been haunting her for weeks. Inside the examination room, Dr. Lauren greeted them warmly. Her eyes, kind but professional, settled on Emily's unusually large belly. "Ready to see your little one?" Dr. Lauren smiled, preparing the ultrasound machine. "Or maybe two," she joked lightly, trying to ease the tension. "With a belly that size, twins aren't out of the question." Emily chuckled nervously, lying back on the stretcher. Michael stood by her side, gripping her hand tightly, his gaze locked on the screen. The cool gel spread across Emily's stomach, and within seconds, the soft hum of the ultrasound machine filled the room. At first, everything seemed normal. The doctor's expression was light, her eyes scanning the monitor as she maneuvered the probe. But then, something changed. Dr. Lauren's brow furrowed, her smile fading as her eyes focused intently on the screen. The silence in the room was deafening. Emily felt her heart drop. She glanced up at Michael, whose knuckles were white from gripping her hand so hard. "Is everything okay, doctor?" Emily's voice wavered, filled with a nervous edge. Dr. Lauren didn't answer immediately, her attention locked on the ultrasound image. After what felt like an eternity, she muttered, almost to herself, This isn't what I expected." Before Emily could ask more, Dr. Lauren stood up abruptly. "Please wait here," she said, her voice strained. Without another word, she quickly left the room. Seconds later, a group of doctors and nurses filed in, crowding around the screen. Whispers of confusion and disbelief rippled through the air, intensifying the already thick tension. Emily couldn't take it anymore. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Michael tightened his grip on her hand, his face pale. Dr. Lauren turned to them, her expression a mix of shock and disbelief. Dr. Lauren took a deep breath before speaking, her voice soft but filled with uncertainty. "Emily, Michael, you're not just expecting one baby. You're going to have 10. The words felt surreal, like they didn't belong in this quiet examination room. Michael stumbled backward, gripping the edge of a chair as if the weight of the news had physically knocked him off balance. 10 babies? It was unthinkable. Emily's heart raced, her mind struggling to comprehend the enormity of it all. 10 lives growing inside her? The thought alone made her feel lightheaded. Michael squeezed Emily's hand, but even he was speechless. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the low murmur of the medical staff exchanging glances. Emily's chest tightened, her thoughts spiraling. How are we going to do this? How could we possibly take care of 10 children? Her breath quickened as tears welled up in her eyes. "But how?" she whispered, her voice trembling, her question hanging in the air unanswered. Dr. Lauren moved closer, her expression serious. "I know this is overwhelming," she said softly, "but there's more. Something else we need to talk about." The news of Emily's pregnancy spread like wildfire through the small town. A couple expecting 10 babies was unheard of, and soon, everyone knew about it. For days, Emily and Michael were overwhelmed with fear, wondering how they would care for so many children. But as the word got out, something incredible began to happen. The town, made up of humble families like theirs, rallied around them in ways they never imagined. Neighbors who barely knew them knocked on their door, arms full of baby clothes, diapers, bottles, anything that could help. Even strangers from surrounding areas came to offer support. "I heard about your situation," one woman said, her eyes kind as she handed Emily a bag of essentials. "You'll need all the help you can get." Emily's heart swelled with gratitude. Each gift, no matter how small, lifted a bit of the burden she and Michael had been carrying. Michael, usually the one offering encouragement, found himself speechless more than once as people poured in with their kindness. "We couldn't have done this without them," he said one evening as they sorted through the dozens of items they had received. His voice cracked slightly, his emotions showing for the first time since the news broke. The community didn't just stop at supplies. Neighbors volunteered to help convert their spare room into a nursery, painting the walls, setting up cribs, 3 large cribs, enough for the 10 babies they were expecting. "This is incredible," Emily whispered one afternoon as she watched a group of volunteers carefully assemble the last crib. She wiped away tears of gratitude, her heart full. Michael, standing beside her, gently took her hand. "I told you," he said. Softly, his voice steady with faith. "We're not in this alone. God will provide, and He's doing it through these people." As the days passed, the support continued to pour in. The town had become their safety net, catching them every time they felt like they were falling. Emily often found herself sitting quietly in the nursery, surrounded by the cribs and the love that came with them. It was in those quiet moments that she realized how blessed they truly were, despite the uncertainty that still loomed ahead. As the weeks passed, Emily's belly grew at an alarming rate. She could feel the strain on her body, each movement becoming heavier, each step more difficult. Carrying 10 babies was no small feat, and Emily felt it in every fiber of her being. Every morning, her reflection in the mirror showed a woman whose body was changing far beyond what she ever imagined. Michael would always offer her a smile, but even his eyes revealed a hint of concern that he tried to hide. But it wasn't just the size of her belly that worried her. In the quiet moments when the house was still, she began to notice something else: sharp, stabbing pains in her abdomen. At first, they were sporadic, brief enough to brush off as normal pregnancy discomfort. But as the days wore on, the pains grew more intense, more frequent. She tried to keep calm, convincing herself that it was simply the weight of 10 lives pressing down on her. How could it not hurt? Michael watched her closely, his optimism starting to crack. He could see how each wave of pain tightened her face, how she tried to hide it, but the worry gnawed at him. He didn't want to alarm her, but every instinct in him screamed that something wasn't right. One evening, as Emily winced through another sharp cramp, Michael finally broke his silence. "We need to call Dr. Lauren," he said, his voice firm. "I can't stand by and watch you in pain like this." Emily nodded, too tired to argue. They called the hospital that night, and Dr. Lauren arranged an urgent appointment for a follow-up ultrasound. The drive to the hospital felt endless, the air in the car thick with unspoken fears. Michael's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, his knuckles white. Emily sat in the passenger seat, clutching her belly, her thoughts racing. When they arrived, Dr. Lauren was waiting for them, her face serious but composed. "Let's take another look," she said as Emily settled onto the exam table, the familiar cool gel spreading across her skin once again. As the probe moved over her belly, Dr. Lauren's expression became more and more concerned. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the machine. Michael stood beside Emily, gripping her hand so tightly it almost hurt. His eyes were locked on the screen, searching for answers, for any sign that everything was okay. But Dr. Lauren's furrowed brow told them otherwise. "Emily," she said slowly, her eyes never leaving the monitor, "I'm seeing something unusual." Emily's heart raced, her breath catching in her throat. "What is it? Are the babies okay?" Her voice was barely a whisper, filled with fear. Dr. Lauren hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. "Most of them seem fine, but there's something strange about one of them. It's not behaving like the others." Michael's grip tightened around Emily's hand. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice shaking. The room felt like it was closing in on them, the tension thickening with every second of silence. Dr. Lauren looked up, her face pale. "I'm not sure yet, but I think one of them isn't a baby." The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. Emily's mind swirled with confusion. Not a baby? What could that possibly mean? Before she could ask more, Dr. Lauren stood up. "I need to consult with my colleagues. Please stay here." She left the room quickly, leaving Emily and Michael alone in a suffocating silence. Emily stared at the ceiling, her thoughts racing, her heart pounding in her chest. Michael leaned down, pressing his forehead to her hand. "We'll get through this," he whispered, but even he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. Minutes later, Dr. Lauren returned, followed by 2 other doctors. They gathered around the screen, murmuring quietly among themselves, their expressions grim. Emily's fear escalated with every whisper, with every concerned glance they exchanged. Finally, one of the doctors turned to them and said, "Yes, it's confirmed. One of them is not a baby." Emily's breath caught, her world spinning as the gravity of their words sank in. Emily's contractions began not long after the doctors confirmed the unsettling news. The intensity of her pain escalated quickly, far beyond anything she had imagined. Michael, at her side, could barely keep it together as he watched her writhe in agony. The nurses moved swiftly, their voices calm but hurried, preparing for the premature birth of their 10 children. But the looming uncertainty about the 10th, it clung to the air, unspoken but undeniably present. "She's in active labor," one of the doctors announced, eyes wide. The team sprang into action, preparing Emily for an emergency C-section. The decision had been made without much time to debate. There was no other way to deliver the babies safely. Michael stood next to her, holding her hand as tightly as he could, trying to be her anchor in the midst of chaos. But deep down, he was terrified. The fear that something could go horribly wrong gripped his chest like a vice. The operating room was a blur of movement and muted voices. Emily lay on the table, her body trembling from the mix of adrenaline and fear. The doctors and nurses buzzed around her, their faces focused, professional. Despite the numbing sensation of the anesthesia, Emily felt everything emotionally: fear, love, hope, all crashing together at once. Every second stretched out into an eternity as they waited for the first cries. And then, the silence broke. The cry of the first baby pierced through the tension in the room, followed quickly by another, and another. Each sound was a moment of relief, a fleeting assurance that at least some of her babies were healthy, alive. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she heard each child being born, Michael squeezing her hand with every precious wail. "They're beautiful," he whispered through his own tears, leaning down to kiss her forehead. His words trembled with joy, but also with the lingering weight of the unknown, the fate of the 10th baby. 9 babies had been safely delivered, each one crying and being whisked away to incubators for their premature care. The doctors worked quickly, ensuring each newborn was stable before moving to the next. But the tension in the room hadn't dissipated. There was still one more baby, or whatever it was, that needed to come. As the final moment approached, the mood shifted again. The doctors exchanged uneasy glances as they prepared for the last delivery. Dr. Lauren, who had been calm and collected through it all, now looked visibly nervous. "Here we go," she murmured under her breath, as she carefully reached for the last of what Emily had been carrying for months. But what came out wasn't a baby. The room went still, the air thick with confusion and disbelief. In place of a newborn, Dr. Lauren gently lifted what appeared to be a large, fibrous mass, nothing like the tiny, delicate bodies of the other babies. The sight of it made Emily's heart sink. She felt the tears return, but this time not from joy. Michael, too, stared in stunned silence, unsure how to react. "It's a fibroid," Dr. Lauren finally said, breaking the silence. "A large one. It's been growing along with your babies." She looked at Emily and Michael, her voice soft but firm. "This explains the pain, the rapid growth. Your body was trying to protect your babies by forcing labor early." Emily couldn't speak, her mind reeling. She had prepared herself to welcome 10 children into the world, and now there were only 9. The sense of loss hit her hard. She had carried this fibroid for months, thinking it was another life, and now it was gone. Michael knelt beside her, his forehead resting on her hand as he tried to comfort her, but even he didn't know what to say. The mixture of relief and grief was overwhelming. As the doctors finished the procedure, the room began to settle. The cries of the 9 babies echoed softly in the background, a reminder of the life that had been brought into the world despite the loss they hadn't anticipated. As the procedure ended, the weight of the situation sank in. Emily lay quietly on the operating table, her body exhausted but her mind swirling with emotion. Michael, still gripping her hand, struggled to find the right words. How could he? They had spent months believing there would be 10 little lives to care for, to love. Now there were only 9. It was a strange, hollow feeling, losing something that had never truly been. Dr. Lauren stepped forward, her voice soft yet steady. Emily, Michael, I know this isn't what you expected. The fibroid, it isn't the baby you were hoping for, but your 9 children are healthy and strong. That's what matters now. Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. Her heart ached with loss, but as the sound of her baby's cries filled the room, a quiet sense of gratitude began to settle in. Michael leaned in close, kissing her forehead. We still have 9 beautiful babies, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. 9 miracles. And in that moment, amidst the mixture of grief and relief, they held on to the joy that came with their unexpected but precious family. Several weeks later, the hospital was abuzz with excitement. The day had finally come. After months of worry, weeks of recovery, and countless prayers, Emily and Michael were preparing to bring their 9 babies home. Nurses carefully bundled each newborn into soft blankets, their tiny faces peeking out, while doctors gave final instructions on how to care for the premature infants. Emily sat in a wheelchair, gazing at the 9 tiny miracles lined up before her. Michael stood beside her, his face glowing with pride and love. It was a scene they had dreamed about. Though different from what they had originally imagined, it was even more beautiful in its own way. As they prepared to leave, the hospital staff gathered to say goodbye. Applause filled the room, mingled with soft laughter and a few tears of joy from nurses who had watched over the babies since their birth. You're going to do great, one nurse said, giving Emily's hand a gentle squeeze. With their hearts full, Emily and Michael carried their children, 5 girls and 4 boys, toward the car. Michael gently placed them into the specially prepared car seats, each one nestled safely in their spots. As they settled into the car for the drive home, the reality of their new life began to sink in. Driving away from the hospital, Emily looked back at Michael, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions. We've been through so much, she whispered, her voice soft. But now, we get to start our new chapter. Michael reached over, took her hand, and smiled. 9 miracles, he repeated softly, his voice filled with wonder and love. And they're all ours. The road ahead was uncertain, but they were ready, together, as a family. A family that had been through loss, but found unimaginable joy. And with every soft breath of their newborns, they knew that, despite everything, they were exactly where they were meant to be.